Hello, good evening, jolly tea drinkers. Welcome to Bedtime Tea. One more steep before sleep. Grab your teacup and your cozy blanket. We have a very interesting sleep story for you this evening. So, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin this journey together. Tonight's story is The Secret Life of Sean Hanson. When they put me in the back of that police car, I just knew that my life was over. The day had been full of ridiculous and unusual occurrences, starting with all of the shenanigans at the fall festival earlier. Miss T and Paulina were now back at the tea cafe, and their attention was keenly attuned to Mr. Coffee. The drive back from the fall festival was relatively quiet. The electricity of anticipation was in the air. Who was Theodore Treadwell? And why was Mr. Coffee so stressed about sharing that information? Now, the three friends were inside of the tea cafe. The light from the kitchen cast a sweet glow upon them as they sat at one of the tables. The cafe was closed for the evening, and they were the only ones there. The quiet and shadows created an intimate warmth and comfort between the three. Alina Messina, also known as Miss T, did her best to make her friends feel at ease. She brewed a large kettle of her lavender chamomile tea blend and managed to gather some lemon scones that she had tucked away in the fridge from yesterday. Now she and Paulina sat, listening to their friend as he shared his story. It all started when I was 14, began Sean Hanson, also known as Mr. Coffee. I was a good kid. I wasn't out there looking for trouble, but trouble was out there looking for me, he said somberly. Sean, Miss T interrupted sympathetically, you don't have to tell us anything that you aren't comfortable with us knowing. I disagree, countered Paulina. We should know about the man who comes into our cafe every day and takes us on road trips. I think we need to hear it, all of it. Miss T gave her a look. What? Asked Paulina. Am I wrong? Yes, stated Miss T. No, you're not wrong, said Mr. Coffee. Paulina playfully stuck her tongue out at Miss T. But just for the record, Mr. Coffee continued, I've only taken you on one road trip. Best road trip ever, and we should plan another one soon, said Paulina playfully. Okay then, Sean, said Miss T. You have the floor. Sean breathed in and exhaled deeply and said, I just don't know where to begin. Start with why you were in the back of that police car, offered Paulina. Goodness, Paulina, said Miss T. It's okay, Alina, Mr. Coffee said as he slightly chuckled. Gotta start somewhere, right? Yay, said Paulina as she clapped her hands. To make a long story short, said Sean, I was arrested for grand theft. Oh my, said Miss T. Oh wow, said Paulina. Yeah, we're gonna need to hear the long story. Don't even bother trying to make it short, she said as she picked up her teacup and took a long sip. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to agree with Paulina this time, said Miss T regretfully. So, what did you steal, and how much time did you do in prison? Said Paulina. I should have known you had a criminal mind, the way you like to solve all those mysteries with Miss T. Paulina, he doesn't have a criminal mind, said Miss T. But did you really spend time in prison? She asked in unbelief. No, he replied intensely as he looked down at his cup of tea. I was rescued from the possibility of that life, thank God. Who rescued you? Asked Miss T sympathetically. Sean looked up at her and said, My grandfather, Theodore. Oh, exclaimed Paulina. Theodore Treadwell is your grandfather. No, he responded as he shook his head. That's not correct. What? Then who is he? Asked Paulina impatiently. I haven't gotten to that part yet, said Mr. Coffee. I believe you said that you wanted the long story, he chided. Paulina has never been one for patience, joked Miss T. True, said Paulina. I'm sorry. Please continue. When I was 14, my mother moved us to a new neighborhood, Sean began. She said she wanted me to grow up in a better environment with fewer bad influences. She also wanted me to get to know my grandfather, whom I had not seen since I was a toddler. Yep, family drama. I knew it, said Paulina as she smacked her hand down on the table. We moved in the middle of the school year, Sean continued, and I was the new kid, so of course I had trouble making friends. You know how high schoolers are. Plus, this was a private school filled with mostly stuck-up rich kids. I had no idea at the time how my mother was able to even afford it. But I later found out that my grandfather was actually the one who paid for my schooling. Aww, said Miss T. Anyway, Sean continued, eventually 2 kids befriended me, Ronnie Crawford and Evelyn Gilmore. They were nice to me and we had a couple of classes together. They made me feel welcomed and even let me sit with them at lunch. Ronnie and I had a similar personality and shared an interest in the same cartoons, even though we were technically supposed to be too old to enjoy that sort of thing. They were both popular kids, especially Evelyn. As you could imagine, that became a problem for the other popular kids who didn't see me as worthy of spending time with them. One kid in particular, Mark Henderson, always gave me a hard time. I think he liked Evelyn and was bothered by the fact that she paid so much attention to me. Mark would always do things to mess with me at school. He would trip me in the hallways, knock my books out of my hands. One time he even stole my pants during gym period. "Ah, what a bully!" shouted Paulina. "What happened?" At the end of gym class, while I was in the shower, he took my pants from inside my locker. So I stayed in the locker room. I couldn't go anywhere without pants. Eventually, the gym teacher walked through and was able to help me. He had to give me a pair of pants from the Lost and Found collection. They were way too small, but it's all that they had. I had to walk around in those pants for the rest of the school day. "Oh no, that must have been so embarrassing for you," said Miss T. "Such a bully," said Paulina. When Evelyn found out, she actually yelled at Mark for doing it. But that only seemed to make him angrier with me, said Sean. After that incident, Mark got more clever, if that's what you want to call it, and started spreading bad rumors about me. "Oh no," said Miss T. "What sort of things did he say?" asked Paulina. "You name it, he said it," said Sean. Things like that I was dumb, that I didn't know how to read, that I was poor, that I was weird, you know, the usual kid stuff. He just sprinkled in enough truth with the lies so that people believed everything that he said. I just tried to keep my head down and stay out of his crosshairs every day, but the damage was done. He convinced just about everyone in school that if they wanted to keep their reputations intact, they needed to stay far away from me. So everyone did. Everyone except for Ronnie, said Miss T. And Evelyn, said Paulina. Yeah, said Sean as he rubbed his chin. Aw, you liked her, huh? Asked Paulina. Well, yeah, she was pretty and she was kind, said Sean as he stirred his tea absent-mindedly. You never tried to ask her out? Asked Paulina. Me? Said Sean. No way, my self-esteem was pretty low by this point. Besides, she was way out of my league. I didn't have enough guts to even try it. Nice to see some things never change, muttered Paulina as she took a sip of her tea. Wait, say that again? I missed that, said Sean. Nothing. So, back to the police car, replied Paulina after she put her cup back down on the table. Patience, Paulina, said Miss T playfully. I'm really trying here, said Paulina as she gripped her hands together. Okay, so, one day, continued Sean, Ronnie offered me a ride home from school. Here we go, said Paulina as she clapped her hands and scooted closer to the table. I usually walked the 2 miles home every day, but that day, Ronnie offered me a ride home with his older brother, and I took it, said Sean. Ronnie's brother also went to our school. He was 16 and had a car. He had given me a ride home one time before, so I figured he was just being nice again. Oh boy, said Paulina, what happened? Ronnie and I were in the back seat talking, and I didn't notice where we were going until the car stopped, and I looked out the window, said Sean. Where did he take you? Asked Miss T hesitantly. At the time, I didn't know, said Sean. All I knew was that I was at someone else's house. We parked and Ronnie's brother told us to come inside with him. As we exited the car, Ronnie told me that this was Mark's house. What? Said Paulina. Exactly, said Sean. Mark hated me. There was no reason for me to even be at his house, but Ronnie convinced me to go inside. He said it would look weird for me to stay in the car, so I went in. When I got inside, it looked like there was a party going on. There were kids from school there, the older kids. As soon as we were inside the house, I felt even more insecure. I did not hang out with these kids ever. To be honest, I didn't even go to parties. I didn't know what to do, so I tried to just find a quiet spot where I could hang out until it was time to leave. I found a place outside near the pool area and stood there, uptight, with my backpack on one shoulder, just trying not to look as awkward as I felt. It was at that moment when Evelyn walked up to me. Boy, was she a lovely sight for sore eyes, and she was also happy to see me. I told her the story of how I ended up there. She said that regardless, she was happy that I was there and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Ooh, said Paulina playfully. Well, that ooh was short-lived, because the next thing I knew, I was being sprayed with beer, said Sean. What? Asked Miss T. Mark was angry that Evelyn kissed me, so he sprayed me with a can of beer, said Sean. Oh my gosh, what a jerk, yelled Paulina. Everyone was laughing at me. Evelyn yelled at Mark to stop, but he didn't stop until that can was empty, said Sean. I dropped my school bag on the ground as I tried to protect myself from the spray. Foolish, I know. Mark kept yelling at me, saying that I didn't belong at our school, and then he walked away laughing with his friends. "Oh, Sean," said Miss T as she placed a hand on his arm. You know what? You don't have to finish telling us this story if you don't want to." "Yes, he does," countered Paulina. "Come on," said Miss T. "Can't you see that this is a painful memory for him?" "Look, I'm sorry for your childhood pain, Sean," said Paulina, who then looked at Miss T and said, "But he promised us the long story, and I want to hear it," said Paulina. "It's okay, guys. I can keep going," said Sean. "Yes," said Paulina with a small fist pump. "So, what happened next?" "Well, Evelyn tried to help me," said Sean. "She pulled me into the pool house, gave me a towel to dry off, and told me what a jerk Mark was. She apologized and offered to grab one of his shirts for me to wear, but I refused. I just wanted to leave. So she led me to a phone so that I could call my mother. Mom was at work and couldn't come to the phone, so I left a message with one of her co-workers. And then I decided I would just walk home. So Evelyn helped me locate my school bag, and as she walked me to the front door, Ronnie came running up to us. He heard what happened and wanted to know if I was all right. I didn't feel like talking very much, so I told them that I would see them at school on Monday, and I left the house." "Oh my gosh, that's awful, Sean," said Miss T. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." "Was that the whole story?" asked Paulina. "Because it still doesn't explain Theodore Treadwell." "Don't worry, the long story is still in progress," said Mr. Coffee. "Oh good," said Paulina as she poured more tea into her cup. "So I started walking," said Sean. "I don't know how many miles away from home I was at that point. I just knew I really wanted to get there, so I kept moving forward. About 20 minutes went by before I heard sirens behind me." "Oh no," said Miss T. "Suddenly, a police car pulled up and blocked my path," recounted Sean as he looked off into the distance. "I was confused, so I stopped walking. The officer got out of the car and asked me my name and where I was headed. I told him that I was headed home. He said that I smelled like alcohol and asked if I'd been drinking. Then he asked to look inside of my book bag. I didn't know any better, so I gave it to him." "Oh no, what was inside of your book bag, Sean?" asked Paulina carefully. "An antique, solid 24-karat gold diamond-crusted paperweight," said Sean. "What in the world?" said Paulina. "Yeah, I didn't even notice that it was in my bag. I never looked inside after Evelyn returned it to me," said Sean. "Do you think Evelyn put that in your bag?" asked Miss T. No way," said Sean. "She would never do anything like that. It had to be Mark who put that in there before Evelyn found my bag. I also found out later that the paperweight was usually kept in a safe, and no one else would have had access to it. I think he was clearly trying to frame me." "Ugh, I'll say it again. What a jerk!" yelled Paulina. "So when the officer saw it, he asked me where I got it from," said Sean. "I told him that I had never seen it before, but of course he didn't believe me. He asked me to come down to the station. He put me in the back of the police car and off we went." "You must have been scared out of your mind," said Miss T. "You have no idea," said Sean. "When they put me in the back of that police car, I just knew that my life was over. I didn't know what to do. I'd never been in trouble with the police before. When we got to the station, they let me call my mom, but again, I had to leave a message with one of her co-workers. They put me in a room and asked me questions. I'll never forget that cold steel chair and table," he said intensely. They just kept asking me the same questions over and over, trying to get me to confess that I stole that paperweight. I'd never been so scared in my life, said Sean as he rubbed his hand over his face. I don't know how much time went by, but suddenly the door opened and my grandfather walked into the room. I remember he had this calm, authoritative way about him. The officers seemed to be intimidated by him. Really? What did he do? Asked Miss T. He told them that if they didn't release me immediately, that they would all lose their jobs and have to pay us millions of dollars, said Sean. I remember wondering if that was even possible. Wow, then what happened? Asked Paulina in awe. They let me go, said Sean. Ooh, I would have loved to have seen that moment, said Paulina. They actually let you go that easily? Yes, said Sean. My grandfather and I walked right out of that station, got into a car out front, and left. I was both relieved and confused. That's such an awful thing for a kid to go through, said Miss T. I hope your grandfather still sued that department, said Paulina. He didn't. But he did do something just as powerful, said Sean. That day, he established my identity. That afternoon, after I told my grandfather all that happened, he took me under his wing. He started to spend more time with me, and he taught me about people, money, business. He taught me how to be a man, a good man. Aw, that's wonderful, Sean, said Miss T. What happened when you went back to school on Monday? Asked Paulina. Well, Evelyn and Ronnie spread word that Mark tried to frame me and told everyone who my grandfather was, said Sean. The popular kids didn't stop hanging around Mark, but at least they weren't treating me like trash anymore. Meanwhile, my grandfather was teaching me good fundamentals every day after school. Aw, that's really sweet, Sean, said Miss T. I ended up leaving that high school and started homeschooling, said Sean. Oh no, said Miss T. It's okay. It was my choice, said Sean. Too much had happened, and when I finally told my mother about everything that happened to me, she was so angry that she happily let me leave the school. She didn't know that you were being bullied all that time? Asked Paulina. No, she had so much on her plate, I just chose to suffer in silence, said Sean as he looked away. Oh, Sean, said Miss T. Anyway, said Sean, I did some research and I realized that I could learn more from a homeschool curriculum. It turned out to be an excellent decision. I learned quickly and graduated high school when I was only 16 years old. Wow, said Paulina in awe. By the time I turned 23, said Sean, I had an MBA and was already running 2 companies. Whoa, want to know what I was doing at 23? Asked Paulina. Still trying to get a good job out of this dumb psychology degree, she chuckled. Psychology, huh? Said Mr. Coffee. Now it all makes sense, he said playfully. What makes sense? Asked Miss T. Let's get back to the story, shall we? Paulina sidestepped with a chuckle. So, what kind of companies do you own? Mr. Coffee laughed. Let's see. Finance, real estate, a bakery, things like that, he said. Things like that? Asked Paulina. How many companies do you own? Several, said Mr. Coffee as he stirred his tea. That's elusive, said Paulina. What bakery do you own? Asked Miss T. Can we get free cupcakes? She asked playfully. You sure can, said Mr. Coffee. I mean, I was kidding, said Miss T. But really? Yes, said Mr. Coffee. For you, anything you want. Are you secretly a billionaire? Asked Paulina. No, chuckled Mr. Coffee. So, just a simple multimillionaire then, said Paulina. Mr. Coffee simply shrugged and smiled. Paulina, said Miss T, I'm sure you're making him uncomfortable talking about his finances. Okay then, said Paulina. So, about Theodore. Okay. I run a non-profit, said Sean, and I like to operate anonymously. I set everything up using the first name Theodore in honor of my grandfather, and I made up a last name that represented what he always used to tell me when I was a teenager. He would always tell me to be a man of high standard and to walk good. So I came up with Treadwell, said Paulina. Theodore Treadwell. The goal was to create a name that would allow me to hide in plain sight while I did my work, said Sean. I choose to help people who are in need, and I operate basically in secret through my organization so that I can do the most good without fanfare or glory. Fascinating, said Miss T. What kind of help do you provide? Different things, he said. You're being all secretive again. Different things like what? Pressed Paulina. Just tell us, you know I'm going to keep asking, she said playfully. He sighed and said, I help build affordable houses for low-income families. We provide food for families in need, support shelters, provide resources for women and children who are trying to escape bad situations. We fund college educations for students who can't afford it. And what? Sean paused as he realized that the ladies stared at him with bewildered looks on their faces. Wow, you really are Batman, said Paulina in awe. Oh, Paulina, get out of here, said Mr. Coffee playfully. I think I finally agree with Paulina, said Miss T. Guys, it's not that serious, said Sean. I bet you own a large estate with a huge mansion, said Paulina. Paulina, you must think you're so smart, said Mr. Coffee. Okay, so where do you live then? Prodded Paulina. He mumbled his answer. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Would you please say that again? Asked Paulina. For your information, I live in the guest house behind the mansion, said Mr. Coffee as he stood up and walked over to grab a napkin from a different table. Why do you live in the guest house? Asked Paulina. Paulina, I think it's obvious that he doesn't want to talk about this, said Miss T. Sean, you are off the hook. We know who Theodore Treadwell is. You don't have to tell us anything more. Nuh-uh, no way, said Paulina as she stood, walked over to the table and pointed at him. We want to know why you live in that guest house. Okay, Paulina, I think it's time to go home now, said Miss T as she stood up and started to clear up the dishes. No, come on, said Paulina as she banged on the table. Okay. I'm staying in the guest house because the mansion is already in use, said Sean. I'm only going to ask you this one time, said Paulina. Are you or are you not running a competing tea cafe out of your mansion? What? No, said Mr. Coffee with a chuckle. He exhaled and said, I have a driver and a house manager. Okay, said Paulina, confused. What's a house manager? Asked Miss T as she sat back down. It's probably just a fancy term for what he calls his maid so that she doesn't feel subservient, even though technically she still is, said Paulina. How could someone so smart be so aggravating, said Mr. Coffee, as he rubbed his head in frustration, walked over and sat back down at the table. I graduated with honors, Paulina said with a chuckle. as she followed him and sat down. "But that still doesn't tell us why you don't live in your mansion, Mr. Coffee." "They are married, and I let them live in the mansion," said Sean. "You do? Why?" asked Paulina. "Yes," Sean sighed. "We foster children. We have the rooms and the resources. We provide a safe refuge for children who have no place to go," said Sean. "And once they turn 18, we provide them with assistance to move forward in their next steps in life, whether that's a job or school." "You take them in, you send them to college, and you give them jobs too? Wow," said Miss T. I don't want to see any child left behind," he said intensely as he looked at her. "If I can do anything to help, then I will." Miss T hugged him and said, "You truly are a good man, Sean Hanson." He stammered, Just trying to walk good, you know?" "You're all right, I guess," joked Paulina. "Thanks, Paulina," chuckled Mr. Coffee. "I'm just keeping you humble," joked Paulina. "So what does your grandfather think about you secretly being Batman?" "He passed away 5 years ago," Sean said, looking down at his cup. "Oh my goodness, Sean, I'm so sorry," said Miss T as she covered his hand with hers. "Yeah, Sean, I'm really sorry. I didn't know," said Paulina contritely. "It's okay," said Sean. "My grandfather lived a really good life and would always tell me how proud he was of me. I tried to honor his memory by continuing my work." They all sat quietly for a moment. "I still have so many questions," said Paulina. Sean looked at her warily. Then she paused and said, "Well, I've got to hand it to you, Mr. Coffee. Your origin story is way better than Batman's." Sean looked at her, paused, and then laughed quietly. "So, now that you know," said Sean, "can I trust that you'll both keep my secret?" "Oh yes, of course," said Miss T. "For sure," said Paulina. "Thank you," said Sean. "I just hate that Mathilda is out there and knows something. I wonder how she got the name." "Yeah, I wonder, what does she know? And who else did she tell?" asked Miss T. "Sounds like you may have a leak in your organization," said Paulina as she took a bite of her scone. "If that's true, then it's very concerning," said Sean. The three friends paused for a moment, deep in thought. "Well, the way I see it, there's only one question left," said Paulina. "And what's that?" asked Sean. "When do we get to visit this mansion?" asked Paulina playfully. "Ooh, and the bakery," said Miss T as she clapped her hands. "Okay, I say first thing in the morning," said Paulina. "You send your driver to come pick us up, bring us to the bakery first to get stuff, then bring us back to the mansion to eat that stuff. Now, is that a good plan, or is that a good plan?" she asked as she gave Miss T a high five. The three friends laughed together. Later that evening, Mr. Coffee dropped the ladies home. Miss T was the last stop. He stepped out of the car and slowly walked her to the door of her house. So, after everything that you heard tonight, are we still good?" asked Mr. Coffee. "Yes, of course we are," replied Miss T. "Did you think that your story would push me away?" "Well, I wasn't sure, though I know you're not that type of person. I was still a bit worried," said Mr. Coffee. "Well, no worries at all, Sean," said Miss T. "We are still friends." "Friends?" asked Mr. Coffee. "Yes," replied Miss T brightly and hugged him. "Good friends." Good friends, repeated Mr. Coffee. Yes, good friends. Friends are good. Miss T smiled and nodded. So I guess I will see you tomorrow, asked Mr. Coffee. As surely as the sun rises, replied Miss T. Mr. Coffee chuckled, turned and started to walk away. Friends are good, he said to himself. Sean! Miss T's voice stopped him in his tracks and he turned around to face her again. You really are a good man. I know that your grandfather would be so very proud of you. Thank you, he responded, a bit choked up. Good night, said Miss T with a smile. Good night, said Mr. Coffee as he smiled back, got into his car, and drove away. The end. I do hope that you enjoyed this story, The Secret Life of Sean Hanson. Join us again next time for another tale from our Bedtime Tea collection. Sleep well, jolly tea drinkers, and may your cups overflow with joy and peace.